Welcome to Subject to Talent, brought to you by Allegis Global Solutions. Similar to you, we're always trying to learn more. On this podcast, we speak to talent experts around the world, covering workforce management, market trends, technology, and our forever evolving dynamic industry. I'm your host, Frank Edge, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Subject to Talent. Today, we are sharing with you a very exciting conversation between industry expert Bill Boorman and AGS's Executive Director, Global Head of Strategy, Bruce Morton. If you don't know Bill, you should check him out. He's a serial researcher and commentator on market trends, and you'll often find him speaking at the leading recruitment and HR events around the world. In this conversation, Bill and Bruce focus on the shift in recruitment over the years and how this year especially has escalated certain areas in the industry. They dive into how the market has changed for candidates and the way people are going to start rethinking about how the job can be done after unexpectedly working through the new normal. Let's listen in.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here today, and I could not be more excited about today's guest, a man that hardly needs any introduction, Bill Boorman, a true legend in our industry. Bill, great for you to speak with you today. Please say a quick hello and give folks a quick background and what you're up to.
Yeah, so first of all, hi, Bruce. It's good to catch up with you again. My name is Bill Boorman. I'm best described as a recovering recruiter. I've worked in and around recruiting for 35 something years. I've worked with agency, ran and owned a few agencies. I've worked directly with corporate. I've spent the last probably 12 years developing initially social recruiting methodology. Now work with technology companies on developing startups. I do a lot of research into what's happening in the market in recruiting and HR in general. And I also run True, which is Recruiting Unconference 100 events around the world. So lots of different pieces of work that fit together. I guess the original gig worker, you might call it that.
Right, yeah. And I think it was probably a True London Conference or HRO today. I think the last time you and I were together face to face. It was great to see you today. So, as you've been in this industry all of that time, and you obviously took a leap of faith to become the person that you are today some years ago, how did you make that decision to say, you know what, I'm going to go out on my own, get out of that staffing agency persona, and actually really dig in and add value through research and everything else that you do?
Well, I think most of what I've done in my career was without a strategy. So there wasn't a grand master plan. I think what you have to do, the key word, nowadays we have a term for it, we call it agile. So it's being very agile and aware of what's going on around you and reacting to those opportunities and finding places where you can plug in value in what you do. My fortunate thing is I had a very long kind of solid founding in recruiting. So I had fundamentals, I was a trainer, board director of a recruitment business. We grew to about 175 offices before it was sold. And then I was around, and that kind of naturally moved into, at the beginning of why I got into social media, I guess, which became social recruiting, which I think is now recruiting, was my office was in my house. For the first time had a training company that was very successful for 6 years and very unsuccessful for one of them. I'd gone bust. For the first time, had nothing to do. And it was round about the same time as Twitter started.
Right.
So I really developed an understanding of social media and connecting purely because I wanted to pretend to my wife I was busy because she would have made me go and do shells or stuff like that, right? So the best thing to do was to sit on a screen for 18 hours and just started working with organizations, bringing an understanding of this new world of social media into my recruiting background. That overlapped. I did some work with Hard Rock Cafe, won some awards, went to Oracle, BBC, a few other places, and did some work, and then evolved into working on the actual tech with startups, And from the startups that, as I now work with PE companies on larger ticket buys of what they want to buy and sit on a few boards. So it's kind of been, I think it's really identifying what the opportunity is and making sure you're well informed, well networked, you understand what's going on, so that you can actually add some value when opportunities come up.
Right. Yeah. But I think the overarching plan is putting it out to the universe and just being open to opportunity. Like people obviously often talk about, wow, you've had some luck, or there's been a lot of great coincidences, but I don't think coincidences are necessarily luck, right?
Yeah. Well, 80% of what you do is unpaid, but you do it with the same passion, and that generates the 20%. I think this is what it is in the agile world, and connecting without purpose was a very new thing. That was something I discovered quite early on, that you just connect with interesting people. You see an interesting conversation. In those days, it was Twitter, Facebook, wherever it is, at a conference, at an event. If there's an interesting conversation, go and join it and try and add some, and join it and learn from the people around you. Try and have a very broad collection of people. Don't look on, and this was coming from the agency world, this was very alien, that you weren't networking for directly a financial opportunity, right? It wasn't just about who are the candidates, who are the clients. It's very interesting HR people talking about things I didn't know about, interesting technology, people who own jobs. That's what we did with True, was bring those people together. So just people, anyone who's doing anything interesting or had an opinion or a view, really just connecting with those people and acquiring that knowledge. I think you make a decision right in the beginning of, do I want to make money from my network or because of my network? And my approach has always been because of my network, because of the people who I know and the connections I make, the knowledge I can acquire, the work that I can, research work I can do in that creates opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice right there. You mentioned social recruiting, that now has just become recruiting. I'm assuming you mean by that because all recruiting is social. So can you just expand on that?
It's not social recruiting, it's recruiting. This is the way in which we hire. This is the way in which people connect. This is the way in which people do HR. I think it goes much deeper than the technology or the channels. It's the way of work, and increasingly, we found it over the last kind of super interesting year. A lot of what we've been talking about for folks like you and myself and lots of other people, we've been talking about for 5 or 10 years, being this is the way, this is going to be the work of the future. Suddenly is, right? There was a pandemic, people had to work remotely. I think we've been forced 5 years ahead of where maybe we would have been by what's going on.
Yeah, and I think we're living through this phenomenal social experiment. And you're right. I think that us, awful term, but futurists, us folks that like to look around the corner, see what's coming, I think we've never predicted the pandemic, but we have been predicting the changing world of work, and it's now upon us.
It's interesting and challenging at the same time, as we have no point of reference. Right. You and I, we're grey-haired enough. We've been through 4 or 5 recessions, economic ones, traditional ones.
Yep.
So, and we have points of reference. We know roughly what they look like. We never know exactly what they look like, but we have data points which will give us an indicator of what's recovering and where it's going and so on. So we have experience we can call on, but we've never had a medically induced recession. So, and we're right at the beginning of this, let's be honest. We're right at the beginning of this. We might be, hopefully, in some places, they're a bit further ahead on the medical piece, which is all we're focused on at the minute, which is how does everyone stay alive in the most healthy way. We're then going to have the economic impact of that when this is a bit more steady. Maybe that will come. Maybe that will come with a vaccine. Maybe it'll be something else. Maybe it will just disappear one day. Who knows? Whatever will happen, we don't have a point of reference. We weren't around for Spanish flu in the 18th century to say, oh, it looked a bit like this, and the world's a very different place now anyway. So we don't really know what it's going to do, but we can see patterns in work which I think are becoming really clear. It's never been more important that we're closer to the data, but if we look purely from a talent acquisition, recruiting viewpoint, there's certain things I'm seeing. One is I sit on the board of Volk, if you know Volk.
Yep.
And so part of what I do is has been throughout this whole period. There's two things I do. I have 200 companies that I talk to every week, senior TA folks, about what they're doing and where they're going and what they're seeing. Yep. And my big question in the beginning was, when all the jobs disappeared, do you think they're coming back? Or do you think this is actually a shift? What we're seeing is jobs are live for shorter periods of time. About 55% of the organisations I track continued to hire during the lockdown period. What happened was face-to-face meetings disappeared. For me, that was, I spent 6 months of the year on a plane going somewhere, and I didn't anymore. I haven't done that. The furthest I've been was down to Canterbury, and I've been out by count once, so very, very different world. But what happened in recruiting terms was we've had the digital transformation that we were coveting, which I think is quite exciting. Suddenly hiring managers would accept videos instead of face-to-face interview. They would accept doing things digitally. They would look at digital tools for scheduling and understanding and organising the workflow for sourcing. We've had to look at things like talent pools to deal with the volumes, because we're getting unprecedented volumes of unqualified people in some places. I think the other big trend that I'm really interested in how it's impacting is, if we look back over the last 10, 15 years of data that's available, about 90% of candidates stayed in their sector. They stayed in the same lane because that's where the money was. You got some experience. You went and worked for another firm, another company that was similar. You hopefully went to a different level. You got some more cash, but you stayed in your sector. People didn't really move out of sector. What we've seen is where some sectors have collapsed, some sectors have boomed, some sectors right now look really sexy, that look really 12 months ago, somewhere that offered a bit of security and level organisation might have looked quite boring 12 months ago, and now is really exciting. So we're seeing lots of candidates switching sectors, and we're not really geared for that. Even the technology we've built, algorithms are built on building taxonomies based on data from things like CVs or resumes, which were sector specific. So I think we're going through this phase where, candidates are doing interesting things. I think companies are, because of the uncertainty, and not looking to make long-term commitments to people. It's a lot more short-term to looking for long-term commitment because of uncertainty, because they're coming out of uncertainty. So
interesting.
We have a whole mesh of stuff going on. What's clear is the time to hire has been cut by at least 50%.
Right, interesting.
Generally, organisations are one interview hire, because all of the pre-interview stuff that was 4 or 5 interviews in a pipeline is now being done digitally and a lot more efficiently and a lot quicker. So we've got very different times. I think the other interesting thing, jobs are staying live for no longer than a week. A big trend I'm seeing with organisations is, because of volume, they are setting a cap on the volume of applications that they receive. So they're, instead of saying we're going to let this job run, a lot of it driven by programmatic, but saying, right, okay, once we've got to 50, close it off, take it down. Once it looks to 50, we're not looking anymore, which from a candidate point of view turns that into more of a foot race. We were already seeing candidates having zero interest in employer brand. This was pre-COVID. Zero interest in employer brand pre-apply, and lots of interest in employer brand post-apply. So it's all very different candidate behaviours to the ones that maybe some of the experts were talking about.
Is that still the case now? Because I've seen you speak about that, and I remember it vividly, because it was really enlightening that in the message, I won't do it complete justice, but was stop spending your employer branding money at the top of the funnel. People don't care. When they really, really care is when they're thinking about applying, or they have applied, right? So it's not an attraction. It's more of a closing brand.
Yeah. So I think that's actually accelerated. At the time, So the talk that I did last year was called Who Moved My Brand, which was really looking at the fact that candidates were looking at job brand, not at employer brand. Which upset a lot of employer branding gurus, by the way, some of whom you know very well. Upset a few of them.
You've got strong shoulders.
I was kind of going, employer brand is really, it's not important for attraction. People aren't following brands in the way that you perceive they are. And the reasons for that are pretty simple. When we looked at research, so I did some research through an ATS called Olio, where we tracked the journeys of 7 million candidates, 7 million applications to see what they did in order to put a white paper together. What was and the big things that came out of that, first of all, was of those 7 million people who applied for a job, it was 0.5% that went into the top of the funnel. So he just did the math on that. 99.5% of the people we attracted were for whatever reason, not qualified, not significant, not able to go into the funnel. So, which told me we were doing a really bad job of attraction for a start. We were attracting all the people who were never going to work for us, and none of the people who were was the main in the way we were doing it. And the other thing so then when we looked at the candidate behaviours, the candidates were applying for 8 times more jobs pre-COVID. It's now running on about 24. So that's been the COVID impact.
Right.
What I'm tracking. We're applying for 8 times more jobs than they'd ever done before. And they were doing that on a very basic criteria. Location, salary, job title was very important. Really, in terms of should I apply for this job or not, the process is going to be painful. I know it is. When I hit this button, I'm going to be made to do stuff I don't want to do. Yeah. The other thing is the candidates were saying to me, and I really can't argue with it, was they were saying, I'm almost definitely not going to hear back.
Yeah.
I'm almost definitely not going to hear anything. Right? Yeah. So I'm not going to invest a lot of emotional time and physical time into a job when I'm probably not going to hear back. But the moment you reach out and go, yeah, actually, I'm interested, then the amount of time they spent looking at employer brand was greater than they would have done had they done the research. Because once you go, I'm interested, right now I'll get engaged in that process.
Got it. Yeah.
And that's happening even more now because of COVID. What you're seeing is the volume significantly increasing, job application becoming a foot reach.
Yeah.
Less and less time to be successful, which means less and less time researching companies. But once I've hit that apply button,
right.
Your challenge is how do I become the employer of choice?
Right.
Because I've applied for 8 jobs. Now, if I'm a good candidate and I'm going to the funnel of 5, 2 of you are coming out of that very quickly. You're starting getting ghosted or...
Yeah. So now you've chosen me. Am I going to choose you, right?
Now I'm going to choose you. So now I'm going to do my research.
Yeah.
So that means delivering lots of content and messaging through the lens of the job rather than the lens of the company. So it isn't look at us.
Got it.
What we're going to see is what attracts people to organizations is actually learning and development content, not employer brand content. Places where people can learn things.
Yeah.
Because when you're moving companies every couple of years, you're not on that learning path of every couple of years you get sent on a course. So our traditional learning has disappeared. So people are staying connected for learning content, not for employer brand.
Right.
And that gives you an opportunity to understand what they're interested in, to assess them. And so what I think we're going to see is L&D and talent acquisition becoming a single function. And I think that's going to happen sooner rather than later. We might not even call it either of those things. We might call it people or whatever term the marketing gurus come up with. But I think you're going to see, and you will see internal mobility increasingly, internal mobility going into talent acquisition. Where we're at right now is as internal mobility goes into talent acquisition, in talent acquisition, we're still dealing with it in a transactional way. So we're still looking at, if we get a job to fill, we look at our internal candidate base, we're still matching it on who can do the job today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're measuring people in that way. You know, you go into that, you go from being a candidate to being an applicant. That's a very different thing. When you become an applicant, you're being measured against a specific job or a specific requirement.
Right.
We're still dealing with internal mobility like that. Whereas I think as we combine with L&D, we will be looking at not just where can you go today, but where could you go in a year's time, and what do we have to do to fill that up? What are the development activities? What's the natural?
We see a lot of, the smarter organizations, let's say glibly, actually finding that, sending the work out to the people as opposed to the other way around. What I mean by that is creating an in-house gig economy, to use that phrase, of what work do you need to get done? Well, promote that to your employee base and give them an opportunity to, reach out and, grab that work as a stretch assignment or else.
Yeah, I think there's work marketplaces, there's work rather than jobs.
Yeah.
There's looking at things as assignments, learning opportunities, understanding that each career move has a finite length of time, which suits both sides, by the way.
Yeah.
Suits both sides. The main barrier we have to all of this at the minute, when it comes to internal mobility, is politics in organisations. So the biggest barrier that I see is when people say to me, "Oh, I'm really into internal mobility," as long as it's done on my people.
Yeah, that's right. You're not given the opportunity.
For old grey-haired recruiters like us, you call it the top drawer. It's not new. This isn't new. This isn't a new thing.
Just a private database now. So I have to ask you this, Bill. So with all of that talk of employer branding, so there's not a day goes by, I'm sure it's the same in the UK, but here in the US, where typically large tech companies are announcing, you don't need to ever come back, or we want you back, but not till next June. This is a big value add. And then we see research. Some people want to get back to the office, others don't. I know the answer is sort of both, but do you see that being part of a value prop going forward? Companies saying, hey, we're going to let you work from home full time, or it's your choice, or?
It's as soon as they make it a value prop, it won't be a value prop.
Right.
Because this is my experience, right? So companies are super tankers. They take a long time to change. It's been a bit forced by COVID. I accept that. There's some things going on which might have taken 3 or 4 years, but companies are super tankers. If you want to change, you have to go through 8 levels of permission, finishing at Voldemort before you can make a decision. It finishes in your C-suite. People change what they want very, very quickly. People are agile, organizations are not. So what I've learned is, as soon as we, and I just gave you the example of employer brand, companies have only just now started getting their employer branding strategy right in terms of how they present themselves. And it's not what the candidates want anymore, right? So it's always this race of the people are ahead of the way the organizations are. So do I think it's going to become part of the value proposition of where people want to work? No more so than other locations. I think you will. What it comes down to is much more understanding about the individual. And the biggest mistake I've seen over this period of time is that people have gone remote, and all they've tried to do is move the office to your front room.
Right.
Really, that's all they've done. Their expectation, their method of working, your method of measuring you and managing you. I'll tell you the thing that I see really missing from remote working, that I think is a piece we need to think around, is everything has become planned when it's digital. So every phone call that you have, every interaction, every Zoom meeting you go on is very structured, very planned. This is what it is. This is what time it is. If we agree we need to have a conversation, you send me an appointment for a week's time when we're going to have that conversation, and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And the thing I think we're missing, and I'm missing this on 2 accounts. One is working, and the other one is life in general. I happen to think those 2 things are the same thing. But what's missing is the creativity of accidental engagement. So
right.
All engagement is deliberate when you're digital. In this digital world, and when you're remote, all engagement is deliberate. Everything has a purpose. everything has a conversation. And you can say, oh, well, when we were at HRO today or at True, I can guarantee you we learned more from that conversation in the pub.
Totally.
For an hour than we probably did in the conference for the whole day.
Yep.
Right.
That's gone.
And that's gone. And that's also not in work. People aren't, there isn't accidental gatherings. There isn't that creativity. And I think that's the bit that's really missing that we've got. And, you know, I laughed, but how many people, you know, tried to create a Zoom happy hour or a hangout in order to look busy? They would, like, you know, I was getting invited to all the, I did a whole load of stuff with the homeless during lockdown. So I was really busy during that period. I was out and about doing stuff. And I was getting invited like 20 times a day to come and hang out with someone. And I'm like, I'm too busy to come in.
And sometimes that's when the magic happens, right? And that's when the creativity happens.
And if you try, it's kind of like having a networking session. When you make it a digital networking session, it becomes false networking, right? And I think that's like being at the beginning of a training course and somebody says, oh, tell us three facts about yourself, Bruce, and one of them's true and all this kind of stuff. And you always think, yeah, that's really funny, but I'm probably not going to use that in my job. We're not, you know, go and talk to 10 people in this room and you're like, yeah, I really don't want to go and speak to 9 of them. So I'll go and do it because that's what we have to do, right? I think we've got to really rethink that piece. How do we get accidental engagement and conversation and socializing again when only 6 of us can sit around the table?
You're right. So we're coming up to time here, and you and I could chat all day, of course, but hopefully people are enjoying the back-to-back here, but I'm learning a ton. And I want to finish on, I guess, and I know that you're so passionate and you just mentioned it, and it was really inspiring following you, as I do, with the amount of work that you were doing for the homeless there in Northampton. And I mean, literally hats off to you. Phenomenal, and really inspiring. But as you think about that side of your personality, about the caring side, the empathy and giving back and everything else, do you see any examples of enterprises, organizations really actioning real work and effort and energy to try and reduce the opportunity divide? Or are you still, I know everybody's passionate, everybody's talking about it, but are you seeing it happen yet? And
an enterprise has to move with the will of the people at the end of the day, not necessarily in a unionized way, but when we talk about, you know, organizations trying to be the good guys eventually might accidentally become the good guys. Kind of how I see it with CSR, like, oh, we better go and do something because we want people to apply for a job for us. So, and when you go and do that, that changes some people and they accidentally do it. You know, what's I think changed me from personal experiences, I got 2 things I've never had. One is I had time. I would never have done the stuff that I've done in normal life because I just wouldn't have had time. And we had the privilege of time and we had an opportunity to go and do something with that. So I could go and do, and I think what we've got to do is turn our, what I did is turn from angry Facebook into saying, I personally need to do something about this problem.
Right.
And I never dreamt it was going to be on my doorstep. It was going to be like in my local area, and I was going to get in my car and go out and feed and cook for people in my kitchen and go out and feed people, right? Or that I would ever have time. I was always going to be the guy who was on a committee or raising money or raising awareness or doing that kind of stuff. So we've had the opportunity to do that. And that's what I'm seeing with people is we've had a period, lockdown, all that kind of thing, where there's been more good done for other people and people bothering about their neighbour. And I'll give you a real simple example of that. I was on a pod to this, but it was a charities. The guys was from Age Concern. And he said the thing lockdown brought, self-isolation of being locked away, was this is actually how our customer group lives their life. They're isolated, they're alone. This is the first time ever neighbours have bothered to see whether they need some food. Right?
Right.
You know, So I think some of that good of your fellow man and ability and maybe what's important in life. I think what's going to have a bigger impact actually on work and all kinds of things, which will be a result of lockdown, is the lockdown experience of people being at home and being with their family as a family for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to have a bigger impact than anything on our attitude to what work we do. How I talk about myself and say, how often am I going to get on a plane again when I can? Necessarily, I travel 6 months of the year,
Yep.
So when I talk to people, there's obviously lots of uncertain things about this period of time. And I think what we've learned is our content and our formal part of conferences is actually much better delivered digitally in smaller bite-sized sessions. I think if I look at half the conferences that I've spoken at, a whole load of them, I think the digital experience for the learning and the content, the opportunity to really watch the speaker and do what you want, has been much better digitally. I don't think we'll ever go back from that.
Right. Yeah.
What we will never be able to get away from is the excuse for you, me, and a bunch of other people wanting to be in London and having a few beers and actually really learning art, expanding, fixing recruiting for one evening.
Yeah. On that note, Bill, I think it's a good point to wrap up. Hopefully the next time I see you, it will be.
I just want to say one thing. I just want to tell everyone to buy your book. It was a very good read.
Oh, thanks, Bill.
He even made me buy it, and I wrote an introduction, so there you go.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time today. As always, great pleasure. We've learned a ton today.
Cheers.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you to Bill and Bruce for a brilliant conversation. If you would like to learn more about Bill, please visit him at billboorman.com. And if you'd like to learn more about AGS, please check us out at allegis-global-solutions.com. If you have any questions for Bill or Bruce, feel free to tweet us at Allegis Global with the hashtag #SubjectToTalent. Also, you can email us at subjecttotalent@allegis-global-solutions.com. And if you enjoyed our podcast today, please subscribe, rate us, and leave a review. Until next time, cheers!